You won't believe what happened in my kitchen that afternoon. One quiet moment turned into a conversation that changed the way I looked at myself, my family, and the years that had quietly slipped past me. It began with my sister-in-law's son stepping through the doorway, his expression carrying a weight I hadn't expected. What he told me made the room feel different, warmer, fuller, and strangely comforting. Before we get into it, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from, and please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It really helps us continue sharing stories like this. The story begins. I was standing at the counter, waiting for the kettle to finish humming its slow way toward a whistle. It was one of those late afternoons when the sun hangs low, shining straight through the kitchen window in stripes that make the dust in the air look like soft glitter. At my age, somewhere between knowing better and still figuring things out, I've grown to appreciate those quiet, ordinary minutes. They feel like small gifts life leaves on the table, hoping you'll notice. I didn't hear the back door open, but I heard his footsteps. Light, hesitant, but familiar. My sister-in-law's son, Daniel, had always walked like he wasn't sure he should take up too much space. He's in his mid-20s now, though still carrying that same careful energy around him. When he stepped into the kitchen, he paused, almost as if he were checking whether I was in the middle of something important. I turned just enough to see him standing there, hands in his pockets, shoulders raised like he was bracing for weather. The kettle finally whistled, and that sharp little sound seemed to give him the permission he needed to speak. "Aunt Marie," he said, though the word aunt always sounded too formal from him, like he was trying to remind himself of some rule. "Do you have a minute?" His voice wasn't shaky, but it carried a seriousness I wasn't used to hearing from him. I motioned for him to sit at the small round table near the window. The chair creaked when he settled into it, and I noticed how his eyes drifted toward the backyard, where the fading light was turning everything a soft gold. "You look like you're carrying something heavy," I said as I poured hot water over the tea leaves. The steam rose between us like a curtain, making the moment feel more private, more important. He looked down at his hands. I needed to talk to someone who listens without judging. That caught me off guard more than whatever he had come to say. It had been a long time since anyone had described me that way. Most days I felt like I was simply moving from task to task, holding the corners of the family together in quiet, invisible ways. To hear that I was someone's safe place, it tightened something in my chest in the gentlest way. I slid a mug toward him. "Tell me what's on your mind." He stayed quiet for a moment, watching the rising steam. I could see him searching for his starting point. There's an age difference between us, of course, more than 20 years, but the silence between us didn't feel strained. It felt thoughtful, respectful, like he was carefully placing each word before speaking it. "I've been feeling lost lately," he said finally. "Like I'm standing still while everyone else knows where they're going. Mom's been busy, Dad's always working, and I don't know who to talk to anymore. You've always understood things in a way that makes them less confusing." His voice softened at the end, and something in that tenderness stirred me. Not in a way that crossed any line, but in a way that reminded me of my own younger years when I wished someone older, calmer, would sit with me and help me steady my thoughts. His honesty touched a part of me that longed to feel needed again, not for chores or errands, but for guidance, for comfort, for the pieces of wisdom I'd slowly collected through living. I reached across the table, letting my fingertips rest near his hand, not touching, just close enough to show I was fully present. "You're not as lost as you think, Daniel. You're just in that part of life where the ground shifts. It's frightening, but it's also where you grow." He looked up at me then, his eyes warm but clouded with whatever emotions he was wrestling. The evening light framed his face softly, and for a moment, the kitchen felt smaller, quieter, like the world had stepped back to give this conversation its own space. "Thank you for listening," he said. "I knew you would." And in that instant, I realized this wasn't just a simple kitchen talk. This moment was going to lead somewhere neither of us had anticipated, somewhere that would ask both of us to understand ourselves a little more deeply. The kettle clicked as it cooled, the house settled around us, and I felt something shift. Subtle, emotional, but unmistakable. Whatever path this conversation was about to open, I sensed it had only just begun. It wasn't like Daniel to share so openly. Over the years, I'd seen him change from that quiet boy who kept his emotions close to his chest to someone a little more thoughtful, a little more aware of the world around him. But this conversation felt like a turning point. I could sense that, for whatever reason, the walls he built around himself were coming down, bit by bit, and I was the one holding the door open. I didn't want to rush him. Sometimes, when you're listening, it's better to just wait for the other person to gather the words they need. The silence between us stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a kind of shared space where both of us were thinking, reflecting. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Daniel broke the quiet again. "I don't know if I've ever really understood what I'm supposed to do with my life," he said, his voice softer this time, almost as if he were speaking to himself more than to me. "Like everyone around me seems to have it figured out. Mom's got her career, Dad's always been the provider, and even my friends, people I grew up with, they all have plans. But I feel like I'm still trying to figure out what matters." I nodded, absorbing the weight of his words. It was the kind of thing you hear a lot from younger people, especially those at the crossroads of adulthood, but hearing it from Daniel, someone I had known since he was a child, made me realize just how deeply the search for purpose could affect someone. "You're not alone in feeling that way," I said. "I think everyone feels that, even people who seem like they have it all figured out. Maybe some of them do, but for the rest of us, we're just taking one step at a time, hoping that something will click." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes tracing the fading light outside, lost in thought. I wondered if he realized just how much of his mother's stubbornness he had inherited, the same quiet determination that made her keep pushing, even when the road ahead seemed unclear. But there was more in his eyes than just confusion or uncertainty. There was something else there, something that felt deeper. Maybe it was the way his jaw tightened when he spoke next. Maybe it was the subtle catch in his voice. Whatever it was, it felt like he was about to say something that had been gnawing at him for longer than I could guess. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's like, sometimes I think I know what I want to do. But then I see everyone else moving forward, making decisions, and it just feels like I'm getting left behind. And I wonder if it's me. Maybe I'm just not cut out for what they're doing, or for what I want to do." I could hear the frustration in his voice. It wasn't just about career paths or big life decisions. It was something more foundational, about his own sense of worth, of capability. Daniel was struggling to understand his place, not just in the world, but in the family, in his own life. He didn't need answers, I realized. He needed someone to listen, to reassure him that what he was feeling wasn't something to hide, something to be ashamed of. I reached for my tea, letting the warm ceramic mug settle in my hands before answering. "It's okay to feel lost sometimes, Daniel. You don't have to have everything figured out by some deadline. Life is. It's a series of steps, and some of them are longer, some of them are shorter. But none of them have to make sense right away. The truth is, the people who look like they've got it all together, they're not any more certain than you are. They're just better at pretending." He chuckled lightly, though the sound was tinged with something else. Relief, maybe, or the first hint of understanding. Maybe for the first time, he realized he wasn't the only one feeling like an outsider in his own life. "You're probably right," he said, "but it's hard not to compare yourself to everyone else, isn't it?" I smiled. It's human nature. We all do it. But at the end of the day, you can't live your life based on someone else's timeline, and you can't measure your worth against theirs either. You've got to figure out what you need, what feels right for you, The rest will follow." Daniel's gaze shifted back to me, and I saw something in his expression that wasn't quite there before, a flicker of something resembling clarity mixed with a quiet gratitude. I realized that, even if he wasn't ready to accept it fully yet, a shift was happening inside him. Maybe it wouldn't be a dramatic overnight change, but that conversation, this moment, was a piece of something bigger. We sat there for a while longer, talking about smaller things. Work, school, the mundane stuff that seems to fill up the day, but doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But there was a shift in the atmosphere now. The room felt warmer, the air more relaxed. The kitchen, once just a backdrop for our routine, was now holding something bigger, an understanding, a connection that had grown quietly between us. Finally, as the evening light began to fade into the purple-blue shadows of dusk, Daniel stood up, looking more like the young man he was than the boy I'd always seen. "Thanks, Aunt Marie," he said, his voice steady now, "for listening, for understanding." I waved him off, feeling something swell inside me, a mix of pride, compassion, and something else, something hard to name. "You know where to find me if you need to talk again." I watched him leave through the back door, his figure dissolving into the dimming backyard. There was a strange sense of finality to the moment, even though I knew we'd continue to see each other, to talk. But for that brief stretch of time, it felt like we had both crossed an invisible line, like we'd reached a place of mutual respect, of honest connection, in a way that only family can understand. It wasn't until the door clicked shut behind him that I realized how much I had needed that conversation too. The days that followed felt different somehow. It wasn't just the usual rhythm of the house, the clink of dishes, the hum of the washing machine, the low murmur of the television in the background. No, something had shifted in the air, as though that conversation with Daniel had quietly rearranged the furniture of my own thoughts. I'd always believed that talking about things didn't just help others. It helped me too. But I hadn't realized how much myself I was missing in the process. I found myself reflecting on my own choices more than I ever had before. The quiet decisions that had defined my life, the early mornings, the endless hours spent caring for family, keeping the house running, managing my own small, sometimes invisible, responsibilities. I'd spent years in the background, comfortable in the shadows, until it became second nature. But now, it felt as though the shadows were pulling back ever so slightly, letting me catch glimpses of something more. In the weeks that followed, Daniel didn't come over as often, but when he did, there was an ease between us that hadn't been there before. It wasn't like we were suddenly best friends, or that everything was magically resolved. But there was a new kind of respect between us, a deeper understanding of the spaces we each inhabited. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, I found myself standing at the kitchen counter again, stirring a pot of soup for dinner, when Daniel's knock came at the door. It was a soft tap, like he was hesitant, not sure if it was the right time. I hadn't expected him today. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see him standing there, his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, the usual guarded look replaced with something closer to openness. There was a calm to him now, a quiet kind of confidence that had been absent the last time we'd spoken. "Hey, Aunt Marie," he said, his voice a little warmer than usual. "Got a minute?" I smiled and stepped aside, letting him in. "You're always welcome, you know that." He nodded, but there was a lingering uncertainty in the way he walked in, like he wasn't entirely sure what he needed, or if it was okay to ask for it. It struck me that, for all the time I'd spent thinking about him and his struggles, I hadn't yet fully asked him what he really needed from me. Not just as family, but as a person who understood what it was like to feel lost. He stood near the kitchen table for a moment, his eyes flicking around the room like he was trying to figure out what he was here for. I noticed that the energy in the room felt familiar, but the person who had stepped through the door had changed, even if just a little. There was more awareness in his posture, in the way his gaze lingered on things, like he was allowing himself to see them fully for the first time. You look like you have something on your mind, I said, setting the soup aside and wiping my hands on a dish towel. I think I do, he replied, his words coming slowly, as if he was weighing each one before letting it fall out. And I think it's time I start making some decisions. Not just about the future, but about myself too. There it was again, his honesty, the same kind of quiet determination I had seen in his mother all those years. But there was something different about this moment. The decision wasn't just about finding his way in the world anymore. It felt more personal than that. It felt like he was starting to understand himself in ways he hadn't before. That's a big step, I said gently. What kind of decisions are you thinking about? He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. I've been thinking about school, work, what I'm really passionate about. But it's more than that, too. I've been thinking about my own expectations. And, well, yours. My expectations. I repeated, a little caught off guard. What do you mean by that? He looked at me then, his eyes steady but searching, as though he was trying to gauge whether it was safe to say what was in his heart. I've always felt like I was trying to live up to something. Like I had to follow a certain path because that's what was expected of me. Like, I don't know, like I had to live up to what everyone else thought I should be. I didn't know what to say at first. I wanted to reach out to him, to wrap my arms around him, and tell him that he didn't have to carry all of that weight. But instead, I stayed quiet, letting him finish his thought. I think I've been too focused on meeting other people's expectations, what my parents want for me, what society wants for me, and not enough on what I want. I've been scared of disappointing people, of not living up to the ideal version of what my life should look like. But the more I think about it, I don't know if I can keep doing that. Not anymore. His voice was lower now, quieter, and I could hear the rawness in it. The same rawness that had been in my own voice at various points in my life. The fear of stepping away from what everyone else expected. The fear of creating a life that was uniquely yours, only to find that it didn't match what the world had planned for you. I finally let the silence hang for a few moments before speaking. You don't have to live up to anyone's expectations but your own, Daniel. People may want certain things for you, but at the end of the day, it's your life. And you can choose to walk your own path, even if it's not the one they imagined for you. He looked at me, really looked at me, as if the words I had spoken were settling into his bones. The weight of it hung between us, but instead of being heavy, it felt like a release. For him, for me, there was no judgment, no pressure. Just an understanding that came from years of living, of making mistakes, and still somehow standing. You know, Aunt Marie, he said, his voice a little softer now, a little more vulnerable than before. I think I've been afraid to let go of the image of who I thought I should be. But I'm starting to see. Maybe that's not who I am at all. It was then that I realized how far he had come in such a short time, not just in terms of his choices, but in his understanding of himself. It wasn't just a shift in his actions, it was a shift in his soul, in his ability to accept who he was, flaws and all. I smiled at him, watching the quiet strength take root in his eyes. It's okay to change direction, Daniel. It's okay to not have it all figured out yet. Life's not a straight line. It's a series of twists and turns, some of them messy, some of them beautiful. But it's yours. All yours. He smiled back, a little uncertain but also sure of something. Thanks, Aunt Marie. I think I'm going to be okay. And just like that, it felt like the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I wasn't just his family anymore. I was someone who had helped him find himself. The weeks after that conversation with Daniel seemed to pass in a quiet, deliberate way. There was a softness to everything. The way the house felt more open, as though it had been holding its breath, waiting for some unspoken tension to break. And it had. Not with a crash, not with a loud declaration, but with a simple acknowledgement that both Daniel and I had been carrying burdens of expectation, of duty, of unspoken truths. And in some quiet way, we had let them go. I could tell that Daniel was taking steps in his life, though they weren't always visible to everyone. He had begun making decisions with more intention, whether it was about his work, his friendships, or even his future. He was still figuring things out, of course. Who isn't? But there was a newfound sense of direction in his stride, an ease in the way he spoke, like he was starting to trust his own voice. One evening, a few months after our conversation in the kitchen, I was sitting in the living room, flipping through a magazine. It was one of those rare nights where the house was quiet. No phone calls, no interruptions, just the soft hum of the ceiling fan above and the distant murmur of traffic outside. I had been reflecting on the changes in Daniel, the way his posture had changed when he walked into a room, the way his eyes seemed a little brighter now, more engaged with life. There was a piece to him that hadn't been there before. The doorbell rang. A soft, almost hesitant ring, but one I recognized instantly. I set the magazine aside, wondering if it was Daniel again, stopping by to visit. He'd been coming by more frequently in recent weeks, his visits sometimes just to chat, sometimes just for a cup of tea, sometimes to share something new that had happened in his life. I'd grown to look forward to those moments, especially because they weren't marked by any particular agenda, but just by the simple desire to be present in each other's company. I opened the door, and there he was, standing on the porch with a kind of nervous energy I hadn't seen in him before. It made me pause for a moment, wondering what was going on in his head. "Hey, Aunt Marie," he said, his voice carrying that familiar warmth, though tinged now with an edge of uncertainty. "Got a minute?" I stepped aside, letting him in, but something in his expression made me wonder what this visit was about. It wasn't the easy, relaxed energy I had grown accustomed to. It was more deliberate, almost as though he had something he needed to say, but wasn't sure how to say it. "Of course," I said, guiding him toward the kitchen. "Let's sit down. You look like something's on your mind." He didn't immediately sit, though. Instead, he lingered by the door for a moment, glancing around the room, as if unsure of his own thoughts. Then finally, he pulled a piece of paper out of his jacket pocket and unfolded it slowly. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his words carrying a certain weight, but also a sense of purpose. "About not living up to anyone's expectations but my own. I've been trying to figure out what that really means for me, and I think I might have figured it out." My heart gave a little leap, a mix of excitement and curiosity. He had always been someone who kept his cards close to his chest, so to hear him say this